As a fisherman, I make my living on the coast. So when my son told me about protecting the coast, I thought he was going to tell me to stop fishing. But I finally went to one of them meetings with he, and it opened my eyes. Terms like climate change, storm surge, and beach erosion had me so confused. But Junior showed me that when we got a storm, we lose a bit more of the beach, and how developers, locals, tourists, and the fishing community all have to learn to use the coast without damaging the coast. If we don't do more to protect our coast, we could lose everything.
Like Freddie and Junior, there are many who rely on our coast for their livelihood. The Coastal Zone Management Unit is working to sustainably manage our coastal spaces by mitigating the impacts of climate change for generations to come through updating the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. From monitoring beach levels, restoring mangroves and wetlands, to working with community leaders and private developers, the CZMU is planning for a safer and more resilient coast. See more of Freddie and Junior's story on the CZMU and GIS social media. Play your part to manage and protect our coast, our home, our future. To view the updated ICZM plan and learn more, visit coastal.gov.bb/ICZM Plan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final meeting in a series of 8 public meetings on the draft Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan and the limits of the Coastal Zone Management Area. My name is Alison Wiggins, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Before I introduce our panel this evening, let me say that our thoughts and prayers are with you in our community who would have suffered any losses from the passage of Hurricane Elsa almost 2 weeks ago. And that is why it's important for us to look carefully at the policies and guidelines on the plan that I mentioned earlier, so that we can minimize the impacts of such hazards. Our team is made up of our chairperson, Dr. Yolanda Aline, who is no stranger to planning in Barbados, environmental planning in Barbados. Then we have from the unit, Dr. Leo Brewster, who's our director, Mr. Antonio Rome, who is our deputy director, Ricardo Arthur, who's a project manager, Fabian Hines, our coastal planner, Ramon Rhodes, who's a coastal information systems manager, and there's Richard Suku, who is our marine biologist, and Shamari Cave, our technical officer. Then our consulting team is made up of a team of experts, and the director of our consulting team from IH Cantabria in Spain is Raul Medina Santa Maria. The team leader for this particular consultancy is Jonathan McHugh and Maria Moreno. And she and her team is ably assisted by the communications team, which is made up of Heather Barker and Renee Gibson. You would have seen over the course of the last month or so, lots of videos and graphics. Those are the persons who did those videos and graphics. Now this evening, we're going to be discussing the policies and the plan from Needham's Point to South Point. As you know, this is a mixed use area. There's tourism, there's residential, there's commercial, there's entertainment. There's a whole set of mixed use activities. So our area encompasses Hastings, Rockley, Worthing and St. Lawrence. Then we have Dover and Maxwell, Welches and Oystons, Enterprise, and Atlantic Shores. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce the chairperson of our public inquiry, Dr. Yolanda Aline, who will provide opening remarks. Dr. Aline.
Thank you very much, Alison. Welcome everyone to this, our 8th virtual public consultation for the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. As I have mentioned at the opening of many other sessions, it is estimating that approximately 50% of our population and 95% of our tourism-related infrastructure is concentrated in or near the area that we traditionally refer to as the coastal zone. And in this area, we have so many activities, as Alison just described, sub-area 8 alone, where we would have infrastructure, we have hotel activities, we have residents, we have institutional activities, schools, health services, and all the infrastructure that goes with that. And I think the passing of Hurricane Elsa will show us with this small space how important it is for us to really manage our coastal areas, because they are vulnerable to storm surge and so many other things. And in the water alone, we also have a range of activities: cargo shipping, leisure craft, fishing, diving, swimming, and the potential for so much more. So it's very difficult for us to manage our coastal areas in an island this size without looking at it in an integrated way and recognizing that there's a significant impact of what we do on the land, having its impact on what happens on the coast and the nearshore marine areas. Therefore, this integrated coastal zone management plan is essential for Barbados. It's especially essential as healthy oceans and coastal areas are vital to our economic future, and we start to look in the direction of blue economy for the initiatives and the potential that has for sustainable development. So as I have stated before, this draft Barbados Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan is a timely intervention in the context of increasing climate and disaster risks, combined with more coastal development and intensive use of our marine areas. So now is the time for us all to get involved, because we, the residents and stakeholders, we are the custodians of our coast. And this consultation process is an important one for everyone to get involved in. As the chairperson, my role is to listen to all the inputs and all the feedback that we get at these consultation processes and filter through those and try to find out how what you say as participants can help us to strengthen the management tools that we have drafted and put on the table for ventilation, and or if you have alternatives to them, what can we do to improve the product that we have as an important management tool for our coastal areas. So I encourage you to listen very carefully to the policies and that are being articulated this evening, look at it and listen to them and give constructive viewpoints on how we can make it even better. And I look forward to a very productive discussion session with you all this evening. As Alison said, our focus is on Sub-Area 8, Needham's Point to South Point. So welcome everyone. I look forward to a very good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aline. Now we have the Director of the Coastal Zone Management Unit, who will provide a synopsis of the sub-area, Needham's Point to South Point, and he'll give us an understanding of some of the impacts of Hurricane Elsa on this particular stretch of coastline. Dr. Brewster.
Thanks a lot, Alison. What I'm going to try and do is just give a general introduction to where we are with the plan and what we've been working on over the last 8 years or so. And as always, it's good to understand that we have to take history from where we started to where we are. So the first plan was done in 1995 by Delcan. It focused on the west and south coast areas predominantly. And it was a compilation of all the information gathered from the technical feasibility and pre-investment studies. During those studies, it was the first time that we actually built offshore breakwaters, submerged offshore breakwaters off of Rockley and Weston. We also constructed the Paynes Bay cliff face revetment and did some other pilot projects. That work in its entirety had built on the diagnostic and pre-feasibility studies of the 82 to 83 work. And we documented also a lot of ecosystem and environmental information. We looked at the coastal engineering structures along the west and south coast, and we also considered water quality and ecosystem health, as well as enhanced our beach monitoring aspects and installed new beach profiling locations. The second plan was done in 1998, and that focused entirely on the east coast of the island, stretching from Maycox Bay around the east coast to South Point. And it looked at how all the work that had been done previously could be replicated for the east coast. It also looked at the same sort of ecosystem data collection and coastal engineering structures considerations, as well as the need for an expansion and modification to our established beach monitoring profile survey systems. It also redefined the west and south coast data into a uniform format so it could be compatible and comparable to the east coast information. And we identified priority areas for integrated coastal zone management, looked at the entire division of the coastline into the 8 sub-areas that we have actually been covering now. And it led to guidance mechanisms for those sub-areas. The third plan, which is the 2020 plan that we are presently presenting, has in its focus the incorporation of climate change considerations and disaster risk reduction into the coastal zone management process. And this is something that has also been based on extensive comprehensive research that has gone into accumulating data through the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program. And that project has helped guide how this information can be transformed into our future activities at the Coastal Zone Unit. Why is the update needed? We recognize climate change is upon us. We've also looked at how we have to give consideration to being able to incorporate new approaches to protect the natural assets for the benefit of our coastal communities in order to achieve economic prosperity. We also have to give consideration to a modern coastal management delivery model, which has to be able to realize and sustain the goods and services and development opportunities that the coast will provide. We also had to look at resulting observed impacts from climate change on matters that speak to coastal erosion, flooding, tropical storms and hurricane impacts, and how they will be exacerbated over time because of climate change in the longer term. And we had to also look at a new delivery model being developed to improve coastal risk understanding and the procedures necessary for infrastructural and non-infrastructural adaptation measures to be integrated into the planning process to increase the resiliency of the coastline to coastal hazards. One thing has to be remembered though, is that implementing a risk resilient integrated coastal zone management process is not a simple task. The key differences between the two plans, the 1998 plan and the 2020 plan, are outlined here. And the real difference is that in the 1998 plan, we had 3 documents. We had a policy framework guidelines document. We had a plan for the Caribbean coast, which was the west and south coast. And then we had a plan for the Atlantic coast, which was the remainder of the island. The 1998 plan developed guidance for the management of coastal uses, the development and regulation of activities along the coast, which have been used up till now to address the whole process and approach to how we view the coastline to be able to be better managed. It also focused on the integrated role and function of all agencies involved in coastal management. So when you use it, you would see who had a responsibility and where the interlinkages between departments could function. And it focused on the institutional strengthening of the Coastal Zone Unit and how it could accommodate this expanded function as part of its expanded mandate. In the 2020 plan, the primary focus is the integration of disaster risk management and climate change adaptation into coastal planning by incorporating the latest outputs from the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Project and the National Coastal Risk Information Planning Platform, which is a planning tool that has been used and developed by the office based on that same detailed oceanographic research that took place. We focused on improving the capacity of the CZMU to integrate climate change considerations into coastal planning considerations as well as coastal zone management initiatives, and it identified new reporting structures for the monitoring and evaluation of the achievements of the plan in the short, the medium, and the long term. The intended impact of the plan is really and truly to provide a detailed guidance mechanism for the management of coastal resources, the uses, the development and regulations along the coastline that embraces current and future climate and disaster related risks. The continuing concept of an island systems management approach is still being implemented here because we recognize that as an island system, things that happen in the center of the island can impact the coast considerably and in a short space of time. The focus also is in relation to the protection of coastal resources and to reduce climate and disaster risk related impacts and risks that fall into ever increasing activities of the Coastal Zone Unit. and to also deal with the identifications of new boundaries for both the coastal zone management area and the zone of influence that surrounds and can impact on that coastal zone area that has been defined. The cost of doing nothing is self-explanatory. Given the amount of critical infrastructure that we have along the coastline, we must recognize its significance, and therefore we have to pay particular attention to what can happen whenever a coastal hazard occurs along the shoreline, and what mechanisms can be rolled out to augment, prevent, and more or less allow for a rapid recovery in the event of such activities taking place. The costs for these measures are still to be determined in the longer term, but using this process, it allows us to err on the side of prevention rather than having to deal with repairing the damage after the natural disaster event takes place. The key policy outcomes from the 1998 and 2020 documents are presented here. And generally what you find is that in 1998, there was a specific focus on applying standards and procedures to avoid the degradation of the environment. We look to seek to employ compatibility between economic activity and environmental interests along the coast. We wanted to also provide a focus for integrated coastal management in the government and the effective linkages with other parts of the public and private sector to create a more consistent approach. We also wanted to raise awareness and activity to encourage public participation. And above all, you also wanted to try to secure adequate financial resources to sustainably incorporate and implement the integrated coastal zone management process and the use of resources effectively. The 2020 outcome bears similar policy structures, but we focus more on outcomes as deliverables now, whereby we're just looking at broad subject context, where we're looking at sustainable economic development is achieved as a primary output along the shoreline, the coastal resources are protected and managed, climate and disaster risk adaptive capacities are strengthened, which means not only within coastal, but across government and its recognition for having these integrated as a key concern across all sectors. We look to also ensure that integrated coastal zone management is delivered through a coordinated governance arrangement, and that focus on research and understanding and knowledge and outreach is increased, while ensuring that the capacity for integrated coastal zone management delivery is strengthened for all the relevant sectors through the course of this work. I think that something that we should look at now is, as this is the final meeting, we've just had a hurricane pass us, and we've had a lot of varying impacts around the coastline. And what I chose to do is just focus specifically within this coastal segment. And just as part of our rapid assessment work, we went out and took some photos and did some measurements. And what we found was, on the left-hand side of the screen, this is the area of Silver Sands Beach where the watercourse runs and where the sand dunes are. And you can see the extent of back beach penetration by storm waves to the point where it actually surged up the dunes on the lower picture and actually flooded into the watercourse. And all the brown stuff you see there floating next to the water is sargassum, okay? All that washed in as part of the storm wave activity. So it gives you an idea as to the extent of penetration of the waves into the actual little watercourse that was there. More centrally on the left-hand side, that is Dover Beach. And once again, you can see that the wave activity, not only post-storm deposited a lot of sargassum in the mid-beach to foreshore area, which is on the right-hand side of the picture, but when you look towards the orange wall in the background, you can see the extent of wave penetration onto the beach and how the beach has been flattened. The picture below that is Atlantic shores, where you can actually see we have a low cut platform here, which is an outcrop of limestone, and the sargassum was deposited on that, but it also, the storm waves also surged up to the building that is right there, so close to the waterline. And generally the water doesn't normally reach up there. You may get oversplashing onto the actual limestone rock outcrop, but the actual deposition of the sargassum and its uprush during the storm clearly shows how close that building is to the high water mark. The right central picture is a picture of, picking up the bearings, the boardwalk. Leading, yep, that's part of the boardwalk. And what you see there is how far up the storm surge again reached actually all the way to the vegetation line. And in doing that, it also infiltrated into the vegetation. And post-storm, we saw a lot of deposition of sargassum in the immediate near shore. And down below is Accra Beach, where we had penetration very high up to the back beach area as well. And directly below that is Drill Hall Beach, which was flooded, actually from partial storm surge and rainwater runoff coming off of the main road. All that was down in the area of Drill Hall Beach. And on the far right, this is the area by the old Casuarina Hotel, which is now Sandals, the water course there. You can see the extent of the blowout that happened from the water flowing through the Sandals property and coming down. This is a natural event that happens down there, even when Casuarina Hotel was there. But notice the height of the berm on the left-hand side, the scarp as the storm water blew out. That's in essence about 3 feet high there. And you can once again see the sargassum was pushed back up inside as a result of storm surge. And then down below that is an area on the boardwalk. And that also had penetration onto the landward side of it. And right below that is further picture of Drill Hall Beach, where you just have a massive deposition of sargassum. It has been considerable. So just to sum up, what you're actually seeing now is that we are looking to ensure that this process of integrated coastal zone management through the new policy and the plan can introduce and improve coastal risk understanding for the country. We're also looking to see how the draft integrated coastal plan can present methods to redefine the boundaries of the coastal management area. We will continue to use the island systems management approach as a central component to all that happens in our coastal assessments. And this plan uses the latest knowledge and science on climate change and coastal risk to produce guidelines, legislation, and regulations that will be fitting us for the next 10 years, because this plan stretches from 2020 to 2030. And we're really glad that you've been able to participate with us in this process along the way. Thanks a lot, Alison. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brewster. Those pictures really show the impacts of that hurricane on our coastline and our coastal resources. At this time, we're really into the meat of the matter. We have the presentation on the policies and guidelines in the plan by Mr. Jonathan McHugh. And after him, Mr. Ricardo Arthur will give an economic aspects of the plan. But as you are listening to the presentations, I hope you've got, you can formalize your questions, and you can type them in the feature at the bottom of your screen, where you can ask questions, the question and answers feature at the bottom of your screen. If, however, somebody needs to make an important intervention, we will open the mic to you, but our primary interest is for you to type your question. But if you urgently need to make an intervention, we will open the mic for you. So I will pass it on now to Mr. Jonathan McHugh, who will give the main details of the plan and the limits of the coastal zone management area. Jonathan.
Thank you, Alison, and good evening to everybody. What we're going to do is I'm going to have the next sort of half an hour to give it the detail of the story of the plan, how it has developed, and the specifics to help facilitate some of the questions. In order to capture who is present, we're going to put on the screen a couple of quick little poll exercises, which I will initiate now when I share my screen. And we will be trying to sort of understand the audience, who is present, and your use of the this particular sub area. So what I'd like you all to do is quickly answer these questions for us. The first question is, are you aware of the current ICZM plan, which is, as Dr. Brewster has described, was written in 1998? So just give us your score. Either you are aware, you're not aware, or you're uncertain. So quite a quick, simple initial question for you all. Each of the 8 sub areas, we're doing this. Some of you may have been party to those, and we're collating these scores to bring as part of the public inquiry. So this evening, our result is 70% of you are aware and 20% are unaware. Okay. The next question is relating to whether you've had the opportunity to review the current 2020 ICZM plan. The options are, I did not know about it. Secondly, I know of it, but I've not had time to review it. Or thirdly, you've all done your homework and you are very diligent and you've got detailed comments to make on the plan. So one of those 3, your scores. And let's see how where we are tonight. And the good news is that we've got 78%, almost 80% of you are aware of the 2020 plan, and nearly a quarter of tonight's audience have reviewed it in some detail. So our third question is more about yourselves, and we're looking to try and find out what are your key coastal interests on the coast in general, not necessarily in sub-areas, but the coast in general. So again, the choices are, you use it for personal recreation, for walking, or for beach or water recreation. Secondly, you live on the coast. Or thirdly, your business is reliant on healthy coastal resources and their specific protection. This gives us just a bit of a feel for the stakeholder use in general for tonight's audience. So 80% of you are using the coast for personal recreation. And interestingly, we don't have anybody whose business is specifically reliant on this area. So that's an interesting finding. Our final question is about you yourself. And I'd just like to know whether you are a stakeholder that's representing from the general public, whether you are working for the private sector, whether you work for government or a public institution, or whether you work for a civil society organization or a non-government association. So one of those 4 gives us a bit of a story as to tonight's audience. And out of tonight, we'll see what attendees we have tonight. So 3/4 of us tonight are from the general public, and about just over 25% from the private sector. So that'll be good, and I think that will facilitate some quite interesting questions once I've completed my presentation. So what I'm going to start with is just to make sure that we're all on the same page with regard to the global significance of climate change and how this may manifest itself in terms of local issues specifically for this sub-area. And as you can see on the screen, for clarity, and as Alison conveyed in her talk, this evening we're talking about sub-area 8, which is Needham's Point, eastward to Hastings, Rockley, Worthing, and the St. Lawrence Gap area, and then through Dover Beach, as Dr. Brewster showed with some of the pictures, the Maxwell area, and onto Welsh's, Oistins, the Coral Cliffs at Kaiser Hill, Atlantic Shores, and then on to South Point Lighthouse. So the Coastal Zone Management Unit over the last 20 years have been studying the effects of climate change on the coast of Barbados. And their work as part of the Coastal Risk Management Programme has concluded that a series of key climate-related hazards must be managed in an integrated manner if coastal resource management is to be effective and successful. And as can be seen on the screen, this can include a range of hazards such as tsunami, hurricanes, tropical storms, which have been recently witnessed, the associated storm surges, landslides, coastal erosion, and sea level rise. But in addition, the recent work has also embraced the implications of oil spills and also terrestrial flooding, and I'll show some of those in photographic form a bit later. And the medium-term risks for storm surge, for example, often occur here, which is exacerbated by the topography of the area and the gradual slope that's apparent on the coast towards Needham's Point. Now, Kaiser Hill, towards the south, is the key area which experiences more cliff collapse in the area. And this shows the storm surge from this slide, the storm surge inundation extents that are specific to this sub-area, and the key additions that are relating to sea level rise, particularly towards Needham's Point area in particular. You can see that to the left-hand side. Now, with regard to cliff collapse, these areas are more noticeable to the southeast of this particular sub-area, as I've said before, towards Kaiser Hill and South Point. And you can see that where the red areas are on the screen. So what do we mean when we talk about coastal resource management, and what are coastal resources? Well, these can include a range of resources, such as cultural resources that are specific to the Barbados coast. It can include valued seascapes. They're more commonly, and most of us tonight will probably understand them more as being coastal habitats, such as you can see on the screen, beaches, coral reefs, wetlands, or coastal cliffs and caves. But protecting these coastal resources must be a national priority. And the expansive fringing reef, you can see, which is clearly visible on this slide, along with the wetland system at Graham Hall Swamp, and also towards Chancery Lane. And likewise, the beach areas are clearly shown in orange, along with important turtle nesting sites, which are close to the mangrove areas inland from, you can probably see from the Maxwell beach area. So I'm going to get you to answer another quick poll for us now. And this poll question is devoted to capturing your view on the importance of these coastal resources that I've just touched on, particularly within this sub-area. So I'd like you to rank, in your view, the importance, either 1, of low importance, or 5, very important, a range of habitats. And you'll see we're dealing with beaches and dunes, coastal cliffs and caves, wetlands, swamps and ponds, which are all relevant within this sub-area, coral reefs and seabeds, cultural resources, and geological formations, landscapes and seascapes. So give us your score. Again, 1 being of low importance, 5 being very important in terms of the need to manage their integrity within this sub-area. So I'll give you 20, 30 seconds to quickly give your views on those, and we'll see what scores come back. And the results of this will help to craft the thought processes that have been adopted for the design of this new updated ICZM plan. And in a moment, my trusted assistant, Carlos, will come up with some of the scores. And this evening, we are looking that we have 100% coverage for beaches and dunes, which is reflecting on probably every sub-area that we've had. For coastal cliffs and caves, understandably, we've got a bit of mix here because of the sort of level of frequency within this sub-area. So we have 50% coverage for coastal cliffs. Wetlands are getting a high score with the link with Chancery Lane and Graham Hall Swamp. 100% coverage for coral reefs. 60% for cultural resources, and 80% for geological formations. So thank you for that. And I think what is important here is that we'll understand the importance of managing coastal resources in an integrated manner as we now talk about how we've demonstrated the approach towards designing the boundaries of the coastal zone management area. And this presentation sort of gives you an overview as to how the new and innovative setback classifications have also been proposed. And again, detailed technical aspects of this are presented within volume 2 of the plan. So the first question that needs to posing is, well, why do we need a coastal zone management area? And the simple answer, as you can see on the right-hand side, is that there is a formal mandate on the Coastal Zone Management Unit to protect coastal resources as defined within the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1998. And importantly, it also helps to define the boundary and the geographic scope of our revised ICZM plan. So this Coastal Zone Management Area is the area where all relevant coastal resources apply, in addition to those socioeconomic activities that may have an impact on coastal resource integrity, health, and status. And as defined in law, any new development proposal that's identified within this area shall have regard to the provisions and guidelines set out in the ICZM plan. This means that the unit will be acting in an advisory capacity to all statutory authorities on all relevant policies, regulations, and advisories that may apply within this coastal zone management area. But it should be understood that the coastal zone management area is not the same as a development setback distance. And this difference shall be explained a little later in my presentation. That recent poll that you all did for me was useful because I think that you can all, it demonstrated that there's a range of coastal resources that need to be considered to help determine the spatial extent of the coastal zone management area. And put simply, all the highly technical surveys and analyses that have been carried out by the unit over the past decade or so have all been used to help define the inland and the offshore limits of this coastal zone management area. And this pays due consideration to the geographic footprint of different coastal habitats, but in addition to the extent from a cultural perspective or from a landscape and seascape perspective as well. But how do we define these? Well, there was a different set of criteria that were used to help determine the inland and offshore limits of each of these coastal resources. And you can see on the screen that, for example, on the left-hand side, for coral reefs, the criteria that was used related to the extent of living shallow water coral reef ecosystems, which commonly is estimated at being close to about 150 meters up from a bathymetric contour perspective. Whereas on the right-hand side, coastal landscape protection areas and important landscapes often command a 200-meter inland buffer from the coastline. So you can see that all of a sudden you have quite an expanse and quite a spread. So the outcome of this analysis, you can see on this slide, and it demonstrates that the coastal zone management area is quite variable in its extent, and it will change around, it changes around the country. So you can see from this slide in green that the coastal zone management area in sub-area 8 has a new set of defined inland and offshore limits when compared to those that were originally established within 1998. You can see that by, if you just have a look at the blue diagonal lines on the slide, they don't quite align with the new green areas. So for example, there's a much broader inland limit in St. Michael, close to Needham's Point. You can see towards the top of the right-hand image. And for the coastal zone management area now is to better reflect the more advanced coastal flood inundation modelling that's been undertaken recently, and also new climate change adaptation scenario model predictions. So this is why you're getting this difference now. And the area is more narrow, it's reduced more if you look now towards South Point, because in 1998, this was commonly following the coastal road. And that coastal road strategy is now not being adopted in light of the improved climate modelling which has taken place. And likewise, if you look offshore, they are further extended in a more seaward direction to better embrace the importance of coral reef ecosystems in this area and to improve awareness and knowledge of ecosystem services that are operating in Sub-Area 8. So all in all, it appears that really space is needed to ensure that coastal policies that relate to protecting coastal resources now needs to be offered for this particular sub-area in the future. And also a separate zone of influence is new to this updated ICZM plan. And this is also defined, which extends from the seaward limit of the coastal zone management area out to the 12-mile territorial limit. And here, the role of the coastal zone management unit will be to raise awareness on marine developments to both the public, the private sector, civil society, and the general public, or where future consideration of an offshore activity is being raised as part of a separate yet parallel blue economy strategy that Dr. Aline alluded to just earlier. This slide shows how the new updated ICZM policy framework embraces a range of current and pending policies that are seeking to promote sustainable management of coastal and marine resources, and they also align, you can see, with the Physical Development Plan of 2017 and this new ICZM plan. And this may help to provide advice on the development of joint initiatives to promote the conservation and the sustainable exploitation of coastal resources within that broader zone of influence that I talked about slightly earlier. Which in this, and you can see in this diagram, it covers the area from the reef edge out to the exclusive economic zone limit, just to the left-hand side of this slide. So before we move on to discuss particular development setback issues, we're just going to pose one more poll question in light of this discussion on the coastal zone management area. And I'd just like you to answer this simple question. Based on the definition and the description I've given, do you agree that this new revised delimitation of the coastal zone management area, compared to that which was defined in 1998, is acceptable? And you have 5 options here. The first one is, yes, I understand the reasoning, why there's a change. The second one is, yes, I understand it, but in parts, to me, it feels too wide. In other words, as I was saying, there's a bit too much space that's being captured in this new zone. The third option is, yes, I understand it, but I think it's too narrow. It really should be broader. The fourth option is, no, I think it should be better to stick with the 1998 definitions and boundary lines. Or fifthly, you have no view in any of the above. So yeah, your view on that would be quite welcome at this time. And we'll see what the general consensus is. We've got pretty close to 70% of people saying that they do understand the change and agree with that in totality, and a mix. Importantly, we have about 11% of you saying that there's no real view either way, but in general, I think people are understanding the reasoning for the approach that was adopted. So thank you for that. But we'll be taking all these points into consideration from a collective national basis. So now I want to briefly outline how the revised ICZM plan is to use this coastal zone management area to improve climate resiliency into developmental planning using setbacks. And the first question is, well, why is this needed? Well, in general, setbacks are a key tool that's used by coastal planners globally, and they refer to areas where development should be restricted or where specific provisions need to be imposed or applied to ensure that safety of structures, the safety of communities, the safety of persons needs to be carried out, especially in the context of climate change. And in Barbados, setback policies are not new, though historically, linear distances selected were often not technically justified due to a poorer understanding of climate-related impacts. So what the revised ICZM plan is now able to offer is a suite of refined setback distances and categories that are not only dictated by improved scientific understanding, but they're designed to not stand in the way of development to take place, even within defined limits, so long as it complies with necessary environmental impact related regulations, and that technical studies have demonstrated that that they are deemed necessary by either town and country planning or as advised by agencies such as the Coastal Zone Management Unit. And this revised ICZM plan can be used for the assessment of applications at this point in time, even without approval, as planning law currently explicitly states that the plan that's in preparation can be used as material consideration for any particular application. So what do these setbacks look like in reality in sub-area 8? Well, you can see that they include a range of possibilities. That these may not all apply within this particular sub-area due to sort of terrain implications. But firstly, and you can see in orange, the minimum 30-metre setback as defined within the physical development plan from high water mark applies to those areas where there's a beachfront development. So you can see that it extends along the majority of this particular area. But it does not apply to land which is fronted by cliffs. And for areas of coast where cliffs occur, the following setback criteria is applied, as can be seen on the screen. And you can see areas of blue where there's a cliff collapse setback area. And this is variable, and it's classified into 7 setback categories according to cliff type. And this was set in 2017 by some very detailed work done by a consultancy team led by Golder Associates. And you can see on the grey box to the right-hand side of the slide that this can range from an additional cliff collapse setback of maybe 18 metres all the way through to 65 metres, depending on the category of the cliff. And in these areas, no new development should occur in these particular areas. And this would apply for Kaiser Hill and the Enterprise District areas. Here on the screen, for the majority of sub-area 8, you can see swathes of blue, and this relates to new flood-related setbacks that are proposed to include the following range of possibilities. And you can see briefly in hashed orange, the minimum 30-metre setback, which applies to those beachfront properties, as I explained earlier. Secondly, we have flood inundation setbacks, which are in stronger light blue, which would take the majority of that slide that you can see. And these limits are variable to include storm surge flood events up to a 1 in 100 year return period. And Dr. Brewster was talking about the implications of those inland flood limits that were experienced as a result of Hurricane Elsa. And here a policy of no new developments are going to be recommended. Thirdly, there's a narrow additional climate change adaptation setback, and that's defined in a more paler zone that you can see. And it's a more of a see-through blue on the screen. And this again is a variable. It's estimated by using the last IPCC sea level rise predictions, and it adds on to the additional setback distance based on these new climate predictions for sea level rise into the future. So these new setbacks are new, and they're included within the ICZM plan, and they represent the findings of the new coastal modelling work, which has been undertaken in the past few years by Baird. And this is being used to help craft new coastal planning along the Barbados coast. So what does this look like in terms of the maps? Well, you can see that on the screen, this is a representative example of sub-area 8 map that is presented in part D. And here you can see 2 the two setback categories clearly, with the flood inundation setback in lighter blue being added onto with the darker blue climate change adaptation setback further inland. And this intends to instill a stronger degree of climate compatible development policy setting for the future in your most densely populated areas. This second plot shows cliff collapse setback areas, and this, as I've said earlier, applies to the southern area of this sub-area 8. This slide, I just want to thank some local residents that sent these pictures through to the unit, Mr. and Mrs. Allen, who live in Atlantic Shores. And for these photos, they show the low-lying properties west of South Point Lighthouse and the demonstrated flooding from sort of rainfall precipitation, not necessarily coastal flood risk, but just during moderate rainfall events. And importantly, the floodwaters, you can see, have been known to flow through properties and then onto the beach. And you can see that at the bottom right-hand image, which is adding to the beach erosion related issue. So this issue is important because it demonstrates the need for a whole government approach, as it requires an integrated management system that addresses not only coastal flood risks, not only beach erosion, but also highway and drainage related matters, all in one management response. So these issues presented in the previous slides, they segue well into this session, where I'm just going to spend a few moments to talk you through the key parts of the ICZM plan, so that you're aware of the level of detail that's contained within it and how it seeks to address these issues that are facing sub-area 8. And with regards to what the ICZM plan will do, put simply, and as you can see on the screen, the plan for sub-area 8 shall, at its core, seek to enforce guidance and to protect wetlands and prepare for coastal hazards, to ensure that coastal development in the future is carried out in a way that protects the local character of the sub-area, and it ensures that beach facilities and recreation are preserved. And I shall focus on these more specific local issues in a moment. But part C of the plan is quite detailed, and it represents the general policy guidance that's set for the coastal zone management area of Barbados. And this part provides guidance for a risk-resilient ICZM from a national perspective, and to address the policy outcomes that are defined in volume 1 of the plan. And you can see here that there are 10 topics that are covered that deal with the national priorities, really, that are relevant to the entire coastal zone management area of Barbados. And as shown in the yellow box to the right, each topic provides a description of the current status of that particular general theme, followed by the possible national implications of not considering that specific topic, and the impact that this may have on delivering sustainable ICZM. And from that, the management guidance is then presented on how the topic should be applied in a manner that better embraces climate and disaster resilience. Finally, actions are listed with recommendations on suitable lead organisations to take forward each proposed action. It includes a timescale for implementation and an indicator which can then be used to measure progress during the lifespan of this 10-year plan. Part E focuses on the actual implementation aspect, and a lot of people in previous sub-area discussions have talked about, well, how is this actually going to be implemented? And it's important that Part E is read so that you can understand the detail. I'll briefly go through the aspects that are included there, because this will be a long-term process and a continuous process that's going to involve a range of agencies. It's going to involve a range of institutions and authorities. And as I said earlier, this is often termed as a whole of government approach. And some elements require immediate action and be straightforward to incorporate into day-to-day operations, and others won't be. But in certain situations, it's hoped that elements can be built into existing governmental arrangements to help provide private individuals and the general public to support with the implementation angle. There may also be the need for new procedures and practices to be developed over time because of the considerable scope and the variety of topics that are covered by the plan. And that includes new emerging issues that may arise. And as shown in this diagram, all 6 ICZM policy outcomes are proposed to be achieved through compliance to these 4 pillars, these 4 priority areas. And these are namely as collaboration, capacity to continue, commitment, and communication. A clear roadmap is shown in this slide, and it's also designed to link the various national guidance actions as presented in Part C to the 6 ICZM policy outcomes. And specific actions are then assigned to one or a range of ICZM policy outcomes as appropriate. And these are then assigned a roadmap timeline as shown in the different coloured stars, namely roadmap 1, which would be short term in 2 years, such as the green stars, the amber or the orange stars are medium term, 2 to 5 years, and the red stars are those actions which can be implemented in the longer term, which we're defining as 5 to 10 years. And you can see in Part E, it goes into detail on a range of important supporting implementation topics, including information needs and data management, education, training and public outreach, institutional and capacity related needs, evaluation and monitoring procedures, and importantly, how much is this going to cost, the financial implications. And on this latter point, the plan at the moment has no formal figure that's currently being set with regards to the budget required to formally implement the plan. However, following this public inquiry process, efforts are going to be made to fine-tune this and include and review the range of actions proposed so that a more targeted value can be placed on the plan delivery in the coming years. So this slide briefly shows the intended development cycle for the ICZM plan. And you can see at the top, there's a green tick, which declares that the Coastal Zone Management Unit have prepared the update to the 1998 plan. This then is going to be modified to reflect all the comments received during this public inquiry process. And once the government of Barbados are happy with this and all the updates made, then the plan shall need formal approval so that the unit can begin to make the plan effectual on the ground. And it shall then be formally monitored and revised every 10 years or so, or alternatively as requested by the director of the Coastal Zone Management Unit. So my final few slides build on the earlier presentation. They focus briefly on the specific features of Sub-Area 8. And with the high urban development and the proximity of key critical infrastructure, such as the Belinda Cox Fish Market at Oistins, the protection of these assets in a sustainable way needs to be continued. And this slide reconfirms the key issues facing Sub-Area 8, and importantly, how the plan intends to address these through the implementation of a number of strategic objectives that focus on enforcing setbacks, to protect wetlands, to improve water quality, and to improve facilities and the ease of access of popular recreational areas, amongst other issues. This slide is taken from Part D of the revised plan. And based on the risks and features known in Sub-Area 8, it shows that there's a series of possible actions that could be considered. And you'll see on the left-hand side that each possible action is assigned, that's been assigned for Sub-Area 8, is aligned to the revised general guidance topics that we've already discussed with you. For example, you can see that each action is given a unique code, and highlighted in pink, you can also see a couple of examples that I'm just going to quickly raise for discussion. Firstly, under the general guidance topic of development planning and setbacks, which is the top pink band, an action is defined to prepare and distribute guidelines to enforce cliff collapse setbacks at Kaiser Hill and Kendall Point. Secondly, under the coastal biodiversity general theme, actions are targeted to support developments to prevent damage to the character of Oistins Village, and also to address drainage issues at Brenda Cox fish market, plus also to promote mangrove restoration programs. So to this end, I think you can see now that there's this whole of government model is being proposed, as opposed to each of these actions being the direct responsibility of the Coastal Zone Management Unit. And of course, much more detail on all of these is provided in the plan. And if you have time to review it, I'd urge you to take more time to have a look at parts C and D of the plan, and that you can see on the Coastal Zone Management Unit's website. So I'm just going to leave with one final poll before I pass back to Alison to pass to Ricardo. And this final poll is asking your consideration on 3 questions. Based on your understanding of my presentation and the sub-area 8, do you think that new engineering measures are needed to support the protection, the rehabilitation, the management of coastal habitats in sub-area 8? So this is the first question is specifically to do with engineering, and that could be hard engineering, it could be soft engineering, or it could be a combination. But I'd like you to just think, use your brain to think from an engineering perspective. Score it 1 if you think, no, engineering is not the solution in this sub-area. Score it 5 if you think it desperately is needed in this sub-area. The second question is linked to social measures. Again, 1 being not needed, 5 being desperately needed. And this is, do you think that new social measures are needed to support improved vulnerable community resilience to coastal hazards? So you might want to contemplate, what that would mean, but it basically wouldn't mean building a defense measure. The third question is capturing whether you believe that new economic measures are needed to support local fisherfolk, the tourist industry, plus also the conservation sector. Again, score that as a 1 if you don't think that economic measures are needed in this sub-area, and score it as a 5 if you think they desperately are needed. So we'll look at the results of these before I pass over to Alison. And we're getting, the beauty of these questions is it really does help to facilitate some of the questions. So we've got a genuine mix of responses from an engineering perspective here. I think that's an interesting finding. From the social perspective, again, we have predominantly most people saying that, yeah, there's going to be a need for some sort of social development approach to support resiliency. And again, from an economic perspective, it's looking like there needs to be a focus on bringing that forward for the Oistins and also for the Maxwell area. So we'll pick those up when we have the question and answer session after I've passed over to Alison. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for a comprehensive analysis of the plan. I turn it over now to Ricardo Arthur, who's a project manager, and he will look at some technical and economic considerations of the plan. Ricardo. Hi, Ricardo, we can't hear you.
All right, sorry, Alison, you can hear me now?
Yes, I can. Go right ahead.
Okay, good. And you can see the screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, good night, everyone. So we hear a lot of talk about the DRM, disaster risk management. I just want to give you a very quick insight into what that actually means. This little cartoon basically shows or represents the existing relationship that often happens between a developer and the regulator, Coastal Zone Management Unit, where you have a developer looking to maximize return on investment, and you have a regulator seeking to protect scarce and threatened resources or coastal resources. And when we speak of risk management, we're really talking about applying a financial lens. And we believe that this will create an opportunity for a common language to be spoken by both regulator and developer and allow collaboration in terms of incentivizing resilience in how we develop our coastline. So that's why it's titled Moving Beyond the Setback Line Argument. All right, so firstly, before we looked at crunching the numbers, so to speak, we made sure that we improved the science. So what you see here, guys in the field, some consultants in the field, they're deploying a drone. The drone was actually measuring the contours of the cliff edge. Here you see the outputs. Now, in the past, we would have to rely on an estimated undercut of the cliff. And I would say estimated, but approximate recession rate. Now we have a measured undercut. Drone technology allowed us to measure that. And we also did boreholes. So we actually know the strength of the rock along various sections of the coastline. So we now have a clear understanding through engineering analysis of where loads can be applied safely to the coastline, to the cliff edge, to the cliffs. So it is no longer a setback based on any approximations. If you look carefully, this is actually a 3D image of the cliff from the drone deployment. And the bottom left-hand corner shows you the yellow hatch area, shows you the actual measured undercut. So we know exactly where that is. And you can imagine without drone technology, that's almost impossible because you're not going to send someone down there with a boat to crash against the cliff edge. In terms of hurricane analysis, we would have done some simulation analysis looking at all the hurricanes that passed within 500 kilometers and would have affected our shoreline, and use some statistical tools to gather data from the period where the tracking information was not as specific. So there's an extensive database as it relates to the hurricanes, the extreme events, storms, hurricanes that would have affected Barbados over the last 100 years. And then I just wanted to show you as well, just to further exhibit the improvement in science. What we have here is an aerial of the Hilton, the green line, a profile line running from the near shore across the breakwater, the sand, and terminating on the roof of the Hilton itself. If you look carefully from the right to the left of the screen, so you're seeing the blue, that is the water depth. You're seeing the breakwater around the 100-meter distance mark. You're seeing all the sand, you're seeing the trees, and around the 20-meter mark, you're actually seeing where the building starts. And this data was collected using similar technology called LiDAR to the technology used with the drones, but using an actual airplane. So you can imagine how important this is, this level of detail in terms of understanding how waves break and how they transform into the near shore, and then also over top when it comes to extreme events over top of the land. Right. So now you understand how we spent a significant sum, about $9.8 million, improving our science. This simple diagram represents the value of what we do at Coastal. So essentially, there are coastal and marine assets which we manage in the interest of preserving the ecosystem, goods and services that are provided. So the beaches, the profile monitoring that we do, the coral reefs, the water quality, coastal wetlands, also managing the development of coastal property, implementing coastal infrastructure to enhance shorelines where possible. All of this leads to specific ecosystem goods and services in relation to the tourism product, reducing risks, improving recreation capacity, aesthetic value, and so on. And this can all be valued in terms of revenues, tourism revenue, jobs. There's even ways to look at the impact of, for example, the boardwalk as it relates to avoided health costs because people are exercising more. So we are moving towards understanding more carefully and quantifying the value of what we do at Coastal Zone Management Unit in terms of real dollars and cents. And we also understand that in enhancing the coastal environment, there will be an improved willingness for people to pay to enjoy these services. Now, when we're speaking specifically to disaster risk management, we're looking at specific coastal and marine assets, beaches, coastal property, and coastal infrastructure. And we're looking at maintaining the benefits in terms of recreation, tourism revenue, reduced losses due to events. So the real thrust is resilience in terms of having a hotel, for example, and you have a storm event, you want to know the hotel is so constructed. Firstly, that there is limited damage when there's an event. And then also that you can return to normalcy very quickly. So minimize business disruption. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about incentivizing resilience. I just wanted to look at row number 5 on this. So as part of these programs, you have what we call a final evaluation of the loan, where you try to understand if the loan has achieved its developmental outcome. So an independent consultant came in, and the conclusion was that over the payback period of the loan, 25-year payback period of the loan, the savings in terms of avoided losses to beach erosion and the beaches being valued solely, and this is a very narrow valuation of beaches in terms of tourism revenue. So over a 25-year period, we borrowed $28 million US, and the savings in terms of implementing our policies within this plan equate to approximately $70 million US. So there's a significant return on investment in terms of following these policy guidelines. And that also is only in relation to climate change effects in terms of sea level rise. Right, so just to be clear, we're maintaining our key focus in terms of protecting natural resources and managing beach erosion. So we're not monetizing the natural resources for trade. It's a new tool in coastal zone management that allows an assessment of the economic benefits to be derived from the controls that we continue to seek to implement. And we are confident that the realization of the importance of maintaining economic benefit flows will create a clear incentive for developers to follow our planning guidelines and completely transform the type of relationship that exists between regulators and developers. So thank you, Alison. Back to you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Now we're at the point where we will entertain your questions. We will be looking to close at around 8 o'clock, but if we have any pertinent questions, we will extend your time, noting that this is the last in the series. So I have, I will read your name based on the questions that were submitted, and then our panel will be then willing to answer your questions. We have a wide range of fields who make up the panel in terms of our expertise. We have a coastal planner, marine biologists, coastal engineers, who are all capable of answering your questions. So let me go back to the chat. Remember, please put your questions in the question and answer box. Let me see what questions we have. I had a question, excuse me, from Lani Edgil, who has asked, When describing the coastline between Needham's Point and Oystons, there is no indication of the Graham Hall wetland, an estuary, sluice gate, or temporary outfall or permanent outfall at Needham's Point. Anyone wants to say anything about this in Sub-Area 8? Any member of the panel? Lanny goes on to say on page 39, it is discussed as the largest mangrove forest on the island, and we would argue the last remaining significant natural mangrove estuary in Barbados. Anyone wants to tackle that? I mentioned to her that we will answer the question during the question and answer session. Fabian, please go right ahead.
Hi, good night to everyone. I think I understand the question correctly. I would say this. As part and parcel of the review of our legislation, the Coastal Zone Management Act, we were sure to try to include references now to habitat in terms of mangroves and even seagrasses. So that has been included, at least in draft up to this point, in the parent legislation, Coastal Zone Management Act, the draft Coastal Zone Management Act, as it relates to the management plan and in terms of its aim to protect the natural ecosystems. One, this is the opportunity for us when the public raises these type of questions that will hint to us that we will need to amend the draft plan accordingly. If more specificity is required, we may certainly take a look at that. But certainly as it relates to the protection of the mangrove ecosystem itself, it is a Ramsar site. I think the plan would have made mention to that, if my memory serves me correctly. And we are trying to protect it in that regard. And it is part of the natural heritage conservation area, which also brings it under the ambit of the NHD, but Natural Heritage Department, in terms of policies and protection as well. So therefore, I think between the new draft physical development plan, the updated draft Coastal Zone Management Act, and your input, which signals to us that maybe we may need to take another look at the plan to improve its specificity. We certainly thank you for your recommendation, their identification of the issue. I don't know if Jonathan, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. Basically, yeah, I've just looked at those particular page numbers, and yeah, there is an omission of those particular points, Lani. So that's a valid point to raise. I think that they were just used to give a bit of a strategic story of the sub areas. They weren't meant to go into great detail, but I think it's a very valid point raised, and we can look to update that in the final plan. So it builds on Fabian's comments, but it's a good point raised. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian and Jonathan, for your answer. Lani, I hope that we would have answered your question. I don't see anyone else with their hands up. My question to the panel, are there any plans to extend the boardwalk beyond the existing limits? Are there any plans to provide the added protection that is needed in the event of a hazard? Anyone would like to deal with that? Fabian, and I see Fabian and Ricardo, I see you turn on. So let's start with Fabian and then let's go to Ricardo. Go ahead, Fabian.
I'm quite willing to let Ricardo go ahead as project manager. So I would respectfully give it to the project manager. Thank you.
All right, no problem, Fabian. Go ahead, Ricardo.
All right, thanks, Alison. So we had a very engaging stakeholder consultation process as part of the design for the shoreline enhancement works from Accra Beach to St. Lawrence Gap. So it's not really about extending the boardwalk, but it's about enhancing the entire shoreline along that stretch. And the stakeholders have expressed in certain areas a desire not to have the boardwalk based on private residential considerations. And so we're likely to implement a solution which enhances the shoreline and facilitates lateral access throughout the year. But you know, the boardwalk itself is not just a boardwalk, it's also added protection to a guaranteed extreme event. But in instances where that is not possible, we would just be seeking to maintain lateral access through beaches and putting structures in place to maintain these beaches. Of course, that will depend on national prioritization, and we're not quite sure as yet which projects will be implemented in the future.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wants to add anything to Ricardo's response? Are there any plans for any further works along in this stretch of coastline? Any other works at all that CZMU is contemplating? Dr. Aline, I see your hand up.
Yes, Alison. I wasn't really, not to do any works, of course, I was only wanted to ask a question about the no new development policy that was described, just so that people understand clearly what that means when you say with respect to the areas for flood inundation setbacks and climate change adaptation setbacks, that there is a policy of no development or no new development. What does that mean? Does that mean development in those areas? It's quite a lot of blue. It's quite extensive on from the coastline. There is development being frozen. Is that what you're saying, or is it that you're saying there's a policy of no new development without an application, which something could be considered? Just for clarity, so that the participants understand what that policy means. Is development being frozen in those areas? It's an extensive area, so I think we should clarify.
Anyone will tackle that question for me? Jonathan, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Aline. I think it's important to sort of clarify that point for everybody. In my presentation, I said that as long as there's compliance with specific adaptation advisories, then the policy does not necessarily mean that development does not, cannot take place in that blue zone. However, they will need to demonstrate very clearly the development has the ability to comply with new building code regulations, new flood risk advisories, new adaptation engineering criteria to make sure that it is not, it's not at risk in itself, but it's also not going to have any exacerbate flood implications to its adjacent neighbours or area. So the quick answer is no. As I said in the presentation, it is not preventing development, but it will prevent development if it is designed and constructed in traditional ways. There will need to be demonstrated evidence not only of to make sure that it's covered from a flood risk perspective, but it needs to make sure that it is going to be compliant in the future to climate change adaptation scenarios, predictions, and sea level rise rate change. So development can take place, but do the studies, do the analysis, and demonstrate that it's not going to be flooded and cause lateral impacts on either side of it.
Okay, so just for clarity, as part of an integrated governance framework, therefore, what you're describing is a situation where the development can take place through some formal process, perhaps an application to the chief town planner or whatever agency it is, so that it can be assessed in respect to the relevant studies that need to be applied. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. The town and country planning will, potentially through the advice through the Coastal Zone Management Unit, be providing that guidance for the expected construction approach for that sort of a development that falls within that blue zone.
And then I had one follow-up question. I think I asked it before. We had a previous discussion about same area where there's no new development unless you have technical studies assessed relating to properties that are not on your coastline, but they are in your the numerous properties that are not coastal in a coastal frontage, and there's a setback being applied. Is there some pre-measured area or setback that the unit, with the science that they have, that they're going to apply to the person's property? Is there something for the property owner to do? Because we know we are familiar with when you're on the coastline, you do you can measure your high water mark and the setback there, because that's traditional 30-meter setback. But when you're talking about something that's not there and it's measured from the same spot, is that something that is pre-measured for persons, and then the coastal zone will give them access to this information? Can you explain for participants how that works?
Can anyone answer that question for the benefit of the chairperson as well as our audience?
Might be one for either Ramon or Fabian to answer with regard to the encrypt system and how that's going to be used to convey to the public.
Go ahead, Ramon, and go ahead, Fabian. Let me go with Ramon first and then Fabian.
Good evening, all. So this is not to supersede Fabian's description of how this will work from a planning perspective. But in terms of the kinds of guidance that the National Coastal Risk Information and Planning Platform will provide the unit, and we can pass on to persons who are developing along the coastline, it is in terms of what your exposure is to a particular type of hazard, be that storm surge or coastal flooding or tsunamis. And then based on that information, guidance related to how you could potentially mitigate those effects. So that kind of guidance in terms of both, here is what you have to look out for in terms of what's going to be affecting your development based on the models that we have developed. And potentially here's how you could start to think about how you could reduce your potential impacts from these hazards. And if we have sufficient information in terms of the characteristics of the development, we can even provide information related to what the potential economic losses would be from if you're affected by disasters of certain magnitudes. So those are the kinds of information that can be provided from the encrypt, and that would be a part of the overall planning guidance that the CZMU passes on to town and country planning for their evaluation, and town and country planning will then provide feedback to the developer based on that information. Thank you.
And Fabian?
Yes, just to add to Ramon's comments, we have issued in the form of our recommendations on specific applications back to the Chief Town Planner or to the Prime Minister's Office Planning Unit. That type of information from the encrypt in terms of the storm surge inundation zones, the 1 in 25-year, 50-year, etc. And already we have had a number of applications now that would have come back in to the unit with revised plans illustrating elevations of the proposed buildings with raised ground floors. There's one before me right now where the ground floor with all the essential services being on a terrace limestone area, they're going to maintain it at approximately 5 meters above sea level, and the pool about 3 meters above sea level, based on those projected inundation areas. And then there's another one we recently sent back to the town planning where even the surrounding lands around the building would have been elevated as well as a direct response to mitigate against predicted storm surge inundation. So we have been using information from the NCRIC. We have had some applicants that value that type of information responding with their development amendments and revisions in their development plans for the specific property to ensure that they mitigate accordingly because it's their investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fabian. Ms. Edgell has further highlighted some of the other issues with respect to the Graham Hall Swamp. Perhaps, Ms. Edgell, I think the best way we can discuss this, I'm going to let the other participants hear the question, but can you also send us your comments, please, at to the unit in terms of how you think the document can be improved with respect to the Graham Hall Swamp as well. Ms. Edgell mentioned Graham Hall Swamp is referred here, and she's speaking about page 176. Is it not a mangrove, wetland, or estuary? You discuss its salinity levels, but make no reference to why this is. For example, inoperable sluice gate. Any one wants to add to this? She went on further to say that the non-point source pollution is also discussed as a reason for the fact that it's under threat. However, there's no discussion on the sewage contamination by the South Coast Sewage Project that has been the biggest threat in recent times and how this is being mitigated. She says, habitat restoration was discussed as a key tool here. How will this be implemented and who will be implementing it? There's a lot of questions here. Lania, can you send us your comments on how you want to see this improved? But we will attempt to answer some of your questions. Fabian, start at the top. Start at the top. Go ahead.
I will share this much. As you will know, the Graham Hall area is an important area ecologically. Historically, it has been influenced from back in the 1970s in terms of alteration by man, in terms of the creation of the artificial lakes, the further creation of the bird sanctuary and some trees, artificial trees as well. So it has undergone significant intervention by development. It has been separated from the sea in terms of its ecosystem services by the coastal road, and its only link is via the culvert there, the drain via the sluice gate. So therefore, because of several years now, dating our past before the 1970s, the functioning of the Graham Hall Nature Sanctuary is not within the true context of an unspoiled mangrove, where is that direct interface with the sea, because now there is a road and there is a beach separating it. Therefore, the salinity of the waters within that swamp is trending towards fresh as opposed to truly brackish, because there's the influx of spring water, fresh water from at least 2 or 3 different sources on the Graham Hall side and on the side just behind the sewage treatment plant by a tree out there. So the water is trending fresh, and that is exemplified by the freshwater species in there, tilapia, some mollies, etc., that wouldn't survive otherwise in brackish water or salt water. So the entire ecology of the area has evolved to reflect the historical evolution of it and isolation of that from the marine environment proper. Whatever salinity is typically from saline intrusion from underground. All right. So once we recognize that fact, and then we add the fact that we have had impacts, as we all know, as we publicly publicized in the media in terms of the impact of the sewage spills, at least on in recent years, on 2 different occasions at least, we recognize then the spillover issues as it relates, one, to the management of sewage and how the government of Barbados, beyond the Coastal Zone Management Unit, and this ropes in now Barbados Water Authority as the agency that manages that, what is the greater master plan? They have some emergency works there now, where there's a pipeline that you will see just by the sluice gate. There's the issue of management by the drainage unit in terms of opening the sluice gate to alleviate flooding for those residents that live around the perimeter of the swamp, particularly on the eastern side, okay? And the impacts that the high water levels there. So you have an issue of sewage management, you have an issue of watershed management, and you have an issue of ecosystem management, which transcends the CZMU, and to borrow Mr. McHugh's term, a whole of government approach has to be applied. And I will say this to you in all sincerity, and the director could correct me if I'm wrong, is that the situation is evolving, and it is evolving based on availability of funding to do the necessary mediation measures to get the sewage treatment issue correct. And I say this to you, that there are plans to deal comprehensively with the treatment of sewage there, and I cannot get into much detail on that right now in this forum, but I assure you there are plans on the table to deal comprehensively with the sewage issue, and that should deal with the issue of impacts of sewage to the swamp area. Okay, once we deal with the impacts of the issue as a government with the swamp as a whole in terms of its watershed, not just the bird sanctuary end or the end with the reefs, you then deal with the health issues with the mosquitoes and stuff. So I'm saying here, the issue is complex. It requires significant funding to get it right, and it requires significant cooperation between all the entities in the public and the private sector involved. So that is the extent of what I can share with you at this point regarding that particular location. Thank you. Oh.
Thanks, Fabian. Thanks very much. Jonathan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a very valid question. But what I just wanted to highlight is that this is a national ICZM plan that is supported by a suite of sub-area action plans, but that's different to going into great granular detail at the specific detail of some detailed individual activities. And this is what Fabian is saying, that addressing some of these issues at Graham Hall Swamp will require like a whole of government approach. But in the plan on page 333, particularly, we have a sub-area 8 action plan. And in there, we have a specific action that, whilst it doesn't necessarily name Graham Hall Swamp, there is an action in there, and it's got a specific code. And the action is to promote a mangrove wetland restoration program. So what the plan is doing is that if this is endorsed and there are budget lines assigned to various actions, then the specifics of this rehabilitation project will need to be fleshed out. But it wouldn't be the plan to flesh it out. There'll be a sub exercise to actually do that in conjunction with the most appropriate sort of funding agency to support that, whether it be government or whether it be international finance. So I hope that tries to answer Lani's question, that we have considered it, although that there is no direct, reference to Graham Hall Swamp, but there is a specific action aligned for that to be addressed.
Thank you very much, Lani. I hope we've answered your question, but please remember, if any of you have any comments which you want to make on the plan, please feel free to go to our website, and there's a form you can actually complete and submit your comments to us on the plan. We'll be very, very appreciative if you can submit your comments to us. The deadline is on Friday, I think, for the final submission of your comments to us. So we look forward to hearing and seeing your comments, Lani, and anyone else who wants to submit their comments on the plan. I have another question. What were the hazards that you studied in order to compile and to undertake the preparation of this draft plan? What were the hazards that were studied? Please raise your hand at one of the individuals who will answer it. And that is, first one is Jonathan. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks for your question. In my presentation, I gave a slide which actually did show how the coastal risk management programs consultancy work that was carried out in 2017 articulated the details of the various hazards. And in that slide, it showed landslides, it showed coastal storms, it assessed tsunamis, it assessed coastal erosion, it assessed oil spills, and there's a sixth that's actually just escaped me. However, having said that, I'm sure one of my esteemed panel members will remind me what I've just missed. But those are the essence of the risk appraisal which was carried out, and the hazard assessment which led into the exposure, which led to the vulnerability assessments, were all encapsulated in that work that was carried out by Baird Consulting. So those are the main hazards that are reviewed. I'm not sure if I included terrestrial flooding, but that was also considered. So you had like I said in my presentation, an integrated approach which needed to be carried out to really appraise the implications of various hazards on all the coastal resources which we've focused on. So again, a lot of the detail is quite clearly presented in the plan, and I'd encourage you to have a look at what would be part A of the revised ICZM plan, which goes into great detail on all the hazards that have been reviewed. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Anybody else wants to add to that?
Not really. Just with, so there's also cliff collapse. So there were 8 hazards evaluated under the CRMP in a probabilistic manner, and not all of them were evaluated, so the wind hazard was also evaluated as part of the CRMP, but that's not a consideration for the determination of the boundaries of the coastal zone management area. So not all the hazards had an impact on the boundary itself, but Jonathan mentioned the predominant ones which influence where the boundary of the coastal zone management area is set, plus the climate change considerations as well.
Thanks very much, Ramon and Jonathan. One other question: how does the plan treat to our other resources, our offshore resources, such as our coral reef? How does the plan treat to those other resources? Jonathan, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks for your question. The methodologies that we adopted for the various coastal resources were presented in one of my slides, but the difficulty with regard to marine ecosystems is trying to know where the connectivities are between the various ecosystems and ecosystem services. So in terms of coral reefs, like I put in my slide, we gave a better judgment this time round compared to what was undertaken in 1998 to basically go deeper and to enable reefs to be embraced down to 150 meters bathymetric contour. Now, biologically, there's scientific sort of justification for going down to embrace that. There could be connectivities for even further offshore, but for management purposes, and it's very similar to if you were starting to consider, well, how far offshore does sand move from the surf zone up? That will vary. That varies around the island. But in terms of marine resources, a judgment need to be made. And the judgment that was taken from that habitat perspective was to embrace coral systems down to 150 meters bathymetric contour. So that obviously means that its geographic spatial extent on the Atlantic coast is different to on the Caribbean coast. And for that reason, when you saw my slides showing the new revised offshore limits of the coastal zone management area, you'll see that in many instances, we're extending this zone further into the nearshore area so that management decisions and management protection guidance can be offered, and the unit will then have a stronger advisory role on issues, habitats, and development proposals in a broader space. So I hope that answers your point there.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. I have a question, which is a really good one, and that is from Therese Yard. And it says, building on the earlier question from the chair, could the team give us more information about the new landscape setback concept, the rationale for it, and how it will be implemented or / enforced? Any one of you can answer this question. Jonathan, you're busy tonight.
Maybe I'll do a tag team approach with Fabian on this one.
Go right ahead.
The quick answer in terms of how this came about, and Fabian will develop further, is very much linked to the physical development plan and the open space policies which are set, and likewise the landscape protection zones, which are defined in part within the Barbados National Plan, but in part in other areas outside of that boundary. So this area is variable in extent, but its criteria that we've set for this plan is for an area between 100 meters and 200 meters inland from mean high water. And that captures the distance set within the landscape protection zones set within the PDP. And it might be something which applies to not all of the areas of Barbados. I think that's the important point to make, but it will link very closely to what is already set out within the PDP. So Fabian, you might want to add to that.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. You're correct. The landscape protection zone, you would normally find that in areas where we want to protect that rustic character of the island's coastline. So you see that within the boundaries of the Barbados National Park that you will find on the East Coast, which comes all the way down from Archer's Bay all the way around the East Coast. And actually there are parts of it that comes all the way down to Enterprise. So we appreciate that we want to protect those more rustic, less developed or underdeveloped areas of coastline in terms of its sand dunes, its vegetative landscape, in terms of protection of coastal woodlands, even that unique character that you will find along the eastern side of the island in its entirety. So where possible, and still trying to ensure that any development that occurs within that area complements the designation. So therefore, in that respect, the new draft integrated coastal management plan is not only complementary towards the new physical development plan, but also to the national park plan as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian and Jonathan. Terez, you can let me know if we've answered your question on this particular issue with the landscape setback concept. Any more questions, colleagues? Any more questions that you would like us answered? Any burning issues for us at the unit? I'm sure you have some other burning questions. If you do not have anybody, I see the panel. I see Dr. Brewster and the chairperson, Dr. Aline. I will go with Dr. Brewster. I haven't heard him as yet. Go right ahead, Dr. Brewster, and Dr. Aline, you'll follow right after.
Thanks a lot, Alison. It was just really in response to the other question that you had raised in terms of any other potential locations for future work within the study area. I don't know if that was answered. I do remember that it was being addressed when just after Ricardo was speaking to the extension of the boardwalk. But the other area that we're also looking at is we plan to do some work in Oistins, where we have to look at shoreline stabilization and enhancement there in the area of the Oistins Fish Market, heading back towards where the bus terminal is. And that is actually some major work that involves inland redesign of drainage, etc., and a more controlled and managed approach to how stormwater flows will come down and discharge into Oistins Bay generally. And that extends pretty far inland as well. So that is also some significant work that is all part of the next phase of the Coastal Conservation Program, which will look at the 5 additional design projects that have been worked on as part of the CRMP.
Dr. Aline, you can follow on.
Yes, Alison, I was just thinking that I'd seen a question and it was there about fisheries management from Lanny Edger and it hadn't been addressed. So I just wanted to know if we could address that.
No, we haven't addressed it. I was about to read the question. So may I proceed then to answer this question?
You can go ahead.
Thank you. The final question, she says, from Lanny Edger, it speaks about fisheries management and it refers to page 178. She says that it discusses the implementation of the marine protection areas as a management tool to increase fish stocks. However, it doesn't discuss the further implementation of them beyond the existing Folkestone Park and the proposed Carolina Bay Marine Park that has been proposed by the dive community since 1993. It also doesn't discuss the reinstatement of the connection of the Graham Hall estuary to the mangrove in order to reap the benefits that the estuary would provide to the fish population. So can someone answer this question? I see Dr. Brewster with his hand raised. Go ahead, Dr. Brewster.
Fabian, I can let you rest, buddy, because you've been doing a lot of talking. All right. Let me start with the last question, okay? There's no real intention of trying to link the sea back with Graham Hall Swamp. Unfortunately, my video isn't working tonight, guys, so I can't use it. But there's no real intention to try to drive seawater back into the Graham Hall Swamp mangrove, because it's been determined that Graham Hall Swamp is a freshwater swamp. Yes, we have red mangroves coastal, and they may receive subtidal or groundwater seepage or seawater seepage in the areas where you may find them, but it is not significant enough to determine that it is going to be a need to reconnect the swamp back to the sea in the manner in which people see in textbooks. So let me just put this to rest, okay? The intention is that Graham Hall Swamp will remain a freshwater swamp where it's fed by 4 or 5 natural springs that occur there, both on the private side as well as on the side that is owned by the government. And that water flows to the sea. And that is why we were supposed to be having the regulated management of it by use of the sluice gate, which is currently being worked on by drainage. There has been a slight modification within the last several weeks whereby they're trying to install a weir, because there is an issue of mosquito population close to the residences, and they're trying to see whether or not the natural influx of seawater in and around the channel will be sufficient to deal with that mosquito problem indirectly. But other than that, there's no intention to have a large connection for seawater to be driven all the way back up into the swamp. That's the first one. In connection with the marine protected areas, the boundaries for the marine protected areas have been identified in the media on several occasions. We are at the process now where the legislation for the perimeter boundary of the marine protected areas, or as we call them, the marine management areas for the West Coast, stretch from Weston in St. James all the way down to Fitz Village, and for the South Coast Marine Managed Area stretching from the Pierhead in town all the way up to Rockley. The intention with that is that within these marine managed areas, there will be several sub areas that have different designations, such as conservation, marine fish replenishment, mixed use recreation, closed zones, et cetera, et cetera. And the perimeter designation, we are hoping will be able to be finalized by the Chief Parliamentary Council by the end of this month, which will in order allow for the Minister of Maritime Affairs and Blue Economy to officially designate the boundaries complete with coordinates for the management of that space. Within both spaces, the existing boundaries of Folkestone, which stretch from Heron Bay down to Sandy Lane, will remain as their designated spaces exist currently, and the area of the Carlisle Bay Marine Park, which is in the area of the Esplanade heading back towards the yacht club, will remain within their own designated spaces as well. They will have specific regulations associated with the type of activity that can take place in there, including activities that speak to how vessels are supposed to tie up on moorings and those sort of things, especially as it applies to Carlisle Bay, right? The work is ongoing. Some people say, obviously, that it has taken eons and eons and eons, and as others will say, tomorrow never comes. But we are a lot closer than people think to having this space designated, complete with the necessary regulations along the way for that. The consultations for those meetings are going to be taking place very shortly. Once we can get the information from CPC, then we will be starting the public consultations regarding the designation of both spaces. As it also stands, the work that this is based on the access study of 2000 to 2007, where for the West Coast, the boundaries and the consultations were exhaustive and fully comprehensively consultative. And those boundaries are still in existence and still going to be enforced. With the extension of the South Coast marine managed area boundaries, we've had to look at the activities that would take place to the east of Needham's Point, because that was never included in the original design. In the original design, it was just the Carlisle Bay space stretching from Pier Head to Needham's Point. But now we've extended it around, and we're also doing the designations as are presented within the physical development plan, the draft physical development plan, where we have special emphasis on turtle conservation and protection, especially in the area of the Hilton and Drill Hall Beach because of the hawksbill nesting site, etc., and other potential designations along the area. And we're also looking to see an improved approach to how nearshore fisheries management can be managed within that space, while regular fisheries management will continue on the West Coast. Those are the plans for that area. They haven't been fully documented or articulated within the Coastal Zone Management Plan, because at the time when the plan was being written, a lot of that information, although captured in an overview sort of manner and approach, was not fully defined at that time, but it will be done. And as with all marine parks or marine managed areas, there will be a specific marine management plan for each space. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Dr. Brewster. Anyone else needs to add any comments? Are there any other questions at this point in time? If there are no more,
just before you would do the final wrap up, I would just like to thank the general public, as I know you're going to do the wrap up, but personally from the Coastal Zone Unit, as director, I'd just like to thank the public for their active participation in this process over the last 8 meetings that we've had. I think it's been a unique approach for us, especially going virtual instead of in person. And the feedback that we've had has been tremendous, both in terms of written submissions through the mail, as well as the online questioning. And I'll hand it back to you, Alison, to do what you got to do.
Thank you. Once there are no more comments, I think, Jonathan, you have a poll now.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah, to reiterate the director's comments, it's been an excellent session, and all 8 have been very positive. What we're doing now is we've got one final poll, which we're going to ask you to give your view on, and it sort of brings together the essence of the what we've been talking about. And the question for you to answer is, how highly would you rate the intentions of the updated ICZM plan that we've been talking to you about? The intentions being, how effective do you think that climate resiliency and disaster risk management is better embraced within this ICZM plan? So could you score that, whether you think it's from a poor, fair, good, very good, or an excellent perspective? And we'll see what the final analysis is of that. So I'm pleased to see that we've got, we're on the right lines, ranging from good, 29%, to 71, excellent. And our final question is bringing together the essence of community resilience. And the question is that the updated ICZM plans, the policies and the actions make me feel more confident that future management of the sub-area will be more resilient to climate change and disasters in the future. How much do you agree with that statement? Do you strongly disagree with it, or do you strongly agree, or somewhere in between? And that will bring together, hopefully, the message that we're trying to convey to the public with regard to the updated plan. So we'll take a look at the final score. And we're pleased that 67% are agreeing and 33% strongly agreeing. So I think hopefully we're on the right lines with the message of this plan. So from my perspective, thank you for your attendance this evening. I'll pass back to Alison for the final wrap up.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We began this public consultation way back on June the 7th with the launch of the public consultation, public inquiry. So we have a long list of people to thank. Let me thank the Prime Minister for volunteering to so willingly give the remarks at that launch. So, and I'd also like to thank our Minister, Kirk Humphrey, as well. Our Permanent Secretary, Sonia Foster, for providing the support and even attending some of these public meetings. Let me also thank the chairperson, Dr. Yol Alanda Aline, who so willingly took up the challenge of presiding over these public inquiry meetings. I'd also like to thank the team of IH Cantabria, headed by Raul Medina Santa Maria, and the team leader, Jonathan McHugh, who tonight really answered a lot of questions, as well as Maria and Carlos, who provided that background support for these meetings. The team was ably assisted by the communications side, Heather Barker and Renee as well, and for all those ads that you've been seeing on the TV, all the newsletters, all the videos, those videos and stuff were produced by the team headed by Heather Barker. Let me also thank the Government Information Service. Julia Rawlings Bentham was a tower of strength in getting all of our press releases out there, getting a whole set of advertising for us. Last night I even saw an ad during the news. Let me also thank the members of the unit, from the director down, everybody contributing to the success of this public inquiry meeting. Let me mention Dr. Brewster, Ms. Antonia Rowe, Ricardo Arthur, Fabian Hines, Ramon Roach, Richard Suku, Shamari Cave, and those who work behind the scenes, such as Charmaine Yard, who assisted in getting those invitations out. But most importantly, let me thank the members of the public who attended all 8 of these meetings. Your contribution will help us to formulate a plan and policies which will be reflective of the Barbadian character. So we want to thank you for attending each and every one of these 8 meetings. It was tremendous. The support that you gave us was absolutely tremendous. And the task is now for us to incorporate your comments to make sure that we have a plan that is responsive to the needs of Barbados. So I want to thank each and every one of you who contributed to the success of this public inquiry meetings over the last month. Please remember that when you close the meeting, there's an exit poll that you can complete for us. It is vital for us for you to complete that exit poll for us. So on behalf of the entire team, from Dr. Ali, the unit, IH Cantabria, the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, thank you for your contribution to the public inquiry meetings. And we hope to see you soon again as we seek to make the course a course to be very proud of. Thank you very much and good evening.